Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Hogging the Mic, the Boar's official podcast bringing you student journalism like you've never heard it before.
This week, we're bringing you a conversation with Boar alumni Sian Elvin.
Sian is the current news editor at The Independent, but she has had a wide range of experience working across a variety of regional and national papers. She told us all about her past and current jobs, while also sharing her top tips for how to break into the industry. So stay tuned to listen out for them.
But first, let's take a look at what's been happening at the Boar this week and spotlight a few articles that have really stood out to us. So, shall we start with sport?
This week, I am spotlighting an article by Charlie Cartwright, headlined National League to delay all kickoff times in EFL promotion protest. This article looks at the current promotion system from the National League to the EFL, where every season 2 teams are promoted into the EFL from the National League, and speaks on why fans and players alike are proposing that this changes to a 3 up, 3 down system, so where 3 clubs would be promoted and 3 clubs would be relegated. This would ensure that more teams are able to bridge the gap between the National League and the EFL. It's a really interesting piece because a lot of local clubs to Warwick and in Leamington are National League clubs like Leamington FC. So it's a really good piece because it looks at the challenges that these kind of tiers of football face and how they could be combated and what teams are doing to make some changes.
That sounds really interesting, and everyone should definitely go and check out that article, especially if they're interested in football, I think. But the article I'm going to spotlight this week is actually from the features section rather than the news section. And the features section has been doing some fantastic work recently on some longer form journalism. And this piece that I've chosen to spotlight by Iman Aziz, Is Decolonization Within Academia Truly Possible, really does that. So it might not be a news story, but Iman has taken a news pitch idea, which we actually pitched a few months ago, I think. And that's the news that Edinburgh University has come under fire over the past year over the publication of the Race Review, which found that the university had deeply benefited from colonial wealth and transatlantic slavery. And Iman asked the question of whether decolonization within academia is ever truly possible with these colonial links and colonial past. So Iman takes this question and considers all different ideas within this debate. So whether the likes of a change in syllabus and getting rid of these links to arms companies is ever possible. But she seems to come to the conclusion within her article that with ties to arms industries and those that are funding and fueling the conflict in Israel and Palestine, that with links to companies like Alphabet Inc., Amazon, and HSBC, that decolonization, whatever projects have been put forward to try and decolonize, are never truly come to fruition when these links still exist. So definitely more than one side to this debate, but Iman takes this question and really explodes it. So definitely go and have a read of this if you're interested in that, and definitely check out all the other features articles and all the work they're doing over in that section as well.
That sounds very interesting. And the article that I've chosen to spotlight this week as well also discusses education and has a few different arguments about education. But as it's from the culture section, we are talking about education in film. So this article I've chosen to spotlight is from the film section. So Gemma Rice has written a really interesting piece about the portrayal of teachers and education on the big screen. She mentions films such as The Class, The Teacher's Lounge, and Cillian Murphy's and Saoirse Ronan's upcoming film Steve and Bad Apples. Gemma discusses how these films tackle an education setting with nuance and how directors go about portraying student-teacher relationships on the big screen. She also poses some great questions about the difficulty of illustrating an educational setting through film and whether the educational setting that a lot of films portray are authentic or not. So it is incredibly well written and definitely worth a read. And as Tom mentioned about news, the culture section has also seen so many new writers. So it's been great to see all the new freshers getting involved and also new second and third years. So, yeah.
Speaking of new writers, I'm going to echo the words of both Tom and Lucy. It's been great to see so many new people getting involved at the Boar. If you want your article to be spotlighted, keep taking pictures from or pitching ideas to our editors. We love things university or local news as well, so make sure you keep an eye out for any stories on campus or in the local area.
And now moving on to our guest today, she is an accomplished journalist who began her career in local newsrooms across Kent and London before moving on to working at national publications. She is now news editor at The Independent and also is very passionate about supporting young journalists who are looking to break into the industry. But remember, like all our guests, they started off at the Boar just like you and just like you listening as well. So even if you are a fresher, don't feel like you can't get involved. Please get involved and you could end up in a job like Sian in the future.
This week, it was just me and Tom who spoke to our guest, but fear not, as Rachel will be back for our next interview on the next episode in a couple of weeks' time. But for now, we hope you enjoy our chat with Sian Elvin.
Our guest today started off at the Boar back in 2012 as deputy news editor, working her way up to news editor the year after and then deputy editor, overseeing the print and design of the paper. Her love for journalism, however, started before that. She said she knew she wanted to be a journalist from the age of 17 when she had an article published on page 3 of her local newspaper, and she's certainly gone on to achieve her journalism dreams. She began her career in local newsrooms across Kent and London before going on to work at the Metro and now the Independent, where she works as news editor. She's also very passionate about supporting new journalists to break into the industry and has held numerous mentoring and trustee roles at the Student Publication Association, the NCTJ and John Schofield Trust. A few words that often come up when talking about this journalist are enthusiastic, committed and dedicated. She's certainly done a lot in journalism, so let's get talking about it. Sian Elvin, welcome to Hogging the Mic.
Thanks for having me on.
So we're going to start the interview the way we start every one of our conversations, which is what drew you to the Boar?
I think, well, I'd always wanted to get involved in journalism. You know, I'd always grown up watching news, reading websites, reading newspapers and things like that. So I was just really keen to get stuck in. And when I was at school, we didn't have like we had a student magazine, but we didn't have the sort of traditional student newspaper. And what I really liked about the Boar was that it felt just like that. So it came out, I assume it still comes out every 2 weeks. It came out every 2 weeks. And we had the online website and I just really wanted to get stuck into that. And I went to a sort of initial meeting and everybody was really lovely. And I thought, oh, this sounds like a great place to not only sort of improve my career, but also meet some like-minded, lovely people, which they were. And I'm still friends with some of them today. So that really shows that does ring true.
Yeah, we do 2 prints a term now. So we're like 1 every 4 weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
Not quite as on it as it was when it was every 2 weeks. It's quite impressive that you managed to put one out every 2 weeks, I must say.
I know. I actually think I don't know how we did because it was so much work.
Yeah.
So yeah, twice a term probably saves your degrees. So that's
yeah. So as we mentioned in the introduction, you started at the Boar in the news section, originally as deputy news editor, then as the section editor. So news at the Boar can be a very busy section, as Tom knows well, as our current news editor. And you certainly covered a lot of news during your time at Warwick, from asbestos in university accommodation to staff strikes. So what did you gain from editing the section, and are there any abiding memories of your time working in the news team?
I think the main thing for me really is that you realise, as what I have realised going through my career, that things don't actually change that much in terms of how you report the news. I mean, all it's kind of done for me is that it sort of started off being, you know, very local reporting on my university, and then I moved into local papers and it sort of became a little bit bigger. And then obviously now I work for a national, so it's even bigger, even international. So I feel like my scope has just like slowly got larger over the years, really. So that's kind of the standout thing for me. And what I really liked about my time at the Boar was that we got to just talk to lots of different people, and I really properly went to, you know, different events, as you sort of mentioned, like the staff strikes, going to speak to people on picket lines and things like that, actually picking up the phone and interviewing people. And those are things that, you know, still are reflected in an actual journalism job. So when I went to work in local papers, I was already used to picking up the phone and having to speak to the university press officer or something like that, which is something that a lot of people don't necessarily get that kind of experience. So for me, I didn't realise it at the time, but it was actually excellent training for a real job in journalism. And I hope that you're all still picking up the phone as much as possible and speaking to people, because that's like exactly what it's like in real life, which is like really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. We still like to get out and about on campus as well, to go to all the strikes that's going on, to go to all the protests. So it's really good to still get out in the news team and still do lots of reporting on campus as well. But after the news team, you then went on to, as we mentioned, become the deputy editor of the paper, overseeing the print and design of the paper. So you worked a lot with InDesign, and InDesign can often be seen as the enemy of many of our editors at the Boar. How did you find tackling InDesign when you were working on the paper?
I mean, it was 10 years ago now, so it's quite a long time ago. So I'm not sure really I sort of remember that much, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed having a look at the design and sort of thinking about how things could look. I remember that when I became deputy editor alongside some of the other editors, we sort of decided to bring in these sort of like big kind of picture kind of photo splashes, which I think we still do, which is really cool, makes them really visually striking. And I think that's really important to get people to sort of pick up a paper. So that's really nice. And I can see that that's reflected across your website with the use of like the big kind of visual images. And I think particularly given that, you know, phones, their cameras are so much better than they were when I was at university. I still remember going out and taking my digital camera out, and I took a bunch of pictures around campus just of like the main buildings and things like that. So we had quite a lot of different kind of like a library of stock images, whereas now you just sort of, your phone, the quality of your phone is as good as a digital camera. So, you know, you can just take photos of whatever's happening, which I think is really great. And that does kind of lend itself to being able to do these amazing sort of big pictures, which I think is great. So I think that's something that we introduced that I really enjoyed, and that was like a really fun thing to do with an aspect of design.
And talking about that and initiatives that you introduced, were there any initiatives that maybe you wish you had introduced in hindsight with all the work that you've done in journalism since leaving the Boar? Was there any way maybe you'd have changed something?
I think what would be really good, and you're probably much better at it than we would have been at the time, is definitely just like having more training in terms of getting people to know like how to put together a story, you know, how to write like a really good, really solid intro. If I look back at some of the articles that I wrote, I mean, I tried to look back recently and I found it so embarrassing. I didn't really want to like properly look at all my work, but sometimes I looked at things and thought, oh, it really wasn't very well written. And I think it's obviously difficult because you're all kind of like, you're learning as you go along, and that's kind of part of the fun of it. But I think being able to have some proper training and like know just like the main elements that you need for a news story, so to always make sure that you like, you know, try and get different viewpoints, so you've got like a balance across your story, making sure that you've got a quote up high, you know, making sure you go to the university or the student union or whoever you're talking to for a right of reply, and things like that. And I think that would also be really valuable in order to make the articles and things that you're producing not only a better experience for you to write because you know how to do it, but also a better sort of reading experience for your readers as well. So I think more training would have been something that would be really good. I don't know what you do now, but yeah, that would be something that looking back would have been a good thing to introduce.
So yeah, now we could probably do some more training at the Boar, I would imagine. But yeah, now by the time this episode goes out, we would have had our Boar 101 in Freshers Week. So that's good training for our new freshers to get used to how the Boar is running and how to write a story. And we've also got our writers' guides in the WhatsApp descriptions for all our WhatsApp groups for all our writers, where we put out our pitches. So yeah, training's definitely something we're trying to push on a bit more, and especially with lots of our writers. We went down to the SPA conference last year, so again, good experience through there as well. So yeah, definitely expanding our training and the opportunities we're given to writers as well.
That's great.
So after finishing at Warwick, you went on to do your journalism training at PA, gaining a gold standard NCTJ diploma in journalism. We've spoken to quite a few people on the podcast already who've gone down the route of a master's or of graduate schemes. What was it that drew you to PA in particular, and why was that the training route that you decided to take?
Well, I don't think I could get a loan at the time to be able to cover a master's degree. So doing an NCTJ was the most cost-effective option. Also, I was fortunate enough to be living quite near to London at the time. So that was good in terms of location. It meant I could get there easily, and it wasn't too bad of a commute, and I didn't have to move. So those are kind of the key considerations. And also just that PA had and still has a very good reputation. And they trained us very well in sort of the basic principles of journalism, you know, getting something, making sure that you're accurate and you're checking everything that you're doing, making sure that you're fast. Like, I really feel like they really helped us nail the kind of basic principles of journalism, including we did public relation, not public relations, public affairs. So again, we did public affairs lessons, and we also did media law. We did shorthand as well, and shorthand is still something that even though I'm not reporting as much now, I still do use it, and it's something that is very useful for journalists. So that's all those things are like the kind of the core things that you need. We also did a little bit of training in things like video, and more in the production, which again I'd had a bit of experience with in design, but it was really good to go through it in a professional sense. So it was quite a good broad overview, and I think even now, you know, they've even widened that out, so they do lots of different modules. So I don't think shorthand is compulsory anymore, but they do other modules, like, you know, they do sports journalism, they do more to do with podcasts and audio now. And there's lots of, and they do a PR module as well. So there's lots of different options to sort of help you in journalism, as obviously it's changing quite a lot. But it's still really nice in a way that I look back on my training and I think a lot of the things that I learned then were actually still relevant in my career today, which is great. So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend an NCTJ to anybody, no matter where you do it, really, if that feels like a good option for you, of course.
So very soon after finishing your NCTJ, you started out in your first role at a professional newsroom. You started out in local news, as you mentioned, working as a multimedia journalist in Kent for Kent Live Online and for the Sevenoaks Chronicle, Kent Courier and Sussex Courier newspapers. So let's go back to the first day in that Kent newsroom back in December 2015. What was it like?
Quite a while ago.
What was it like finally stepping into a professional newsroom after years of student journalism, and how different was it?
That's great. I mean, what, you know, was amazing was that it was really like buzzing. It was kind of what you expect a newsroom to be, you know, like the news on, phones ringing all the time. You know, there's less of that now because people obviously use their mobiles and things like that. But we had a real sort of desk phone thing, so people would call us and tell us stories on the phone, which was really fun. And it meant that I was kind of chucked straight in, having to answer the phone and take people's queries and get stuck in, really. And I think that's the best way to be, because then it meant I didn't overthink it. I just kind of got stuck into writing the news and getting on with it, really. And I think I've kind of continued my career since, which is on the same lines, which is really exciting.
And it's fair to say you worked on, like you said, there quite the variety of stories while you were at Kent Live, from murder investigations to interviews with celebrities. What was it like having such a variety of news stories to work on and get your teeth into?
It's great, and that's what I still love about the career now, in that you never really know what you're going to be doing that day. You know, you could have a couple of interviews set up and then a big breaking news story could happen, and then you have to move all your interviews and then you have to go down to the scene of a crime or something like that. And I think that's what I still find, even though I'm not going out and on the scene as much because I'm an editor now. I still like not knowing what will come of my day. And I know lots of people like to know exactly what they're doing all day, but I really like the variety of doing lots of different things. So, you know, whether it's going to court or, as I mentioned, going to report from the scene of a crime or something like that, there's always just so many different things to do. And I think as well, what was great to begin with was that you got a real variety of different things to cover. So, you know, you might one day be doing a council meeting, or you might be interviewing somebody who you never met before, you didn't know anything about them, and things like that. So it's really good to have that variety, but also what is also nice when you sort of progress through your career, when you can specialize a bit and you learn about the kinds of things that you really like to write about, and then it means that you can actually use your past experience to know what you want to write about in the future, and then that helps you sort of build more on your interests and what you really specifically want to do, which is great too. I still very much like having a variety of lots of different things to do. I still think variety is the spice of life, but there's also the option to be able to sort of shape your career in the way that you want to.
And also, while you were at Kent Live, you were responsible for rethinking the paper's online and social media output. So you doubled Kent Live's weekly social media referrals from 300,000 to 600,000 in just a month, and launched a WhatsApp news service for My London, which gained more than 5,000 subscribers. So we take social media and journalism for granted nowadays, but 5 to 10 years ago, this wasn't really the case. What was it like rethinking the social media content at this time?
I think, it was different at the time because social media was something that, like, lots of publications weren't necessarily very invested in at the time. So it's something that we were sort of trying to like build up and work on. But I think what particularly stands out to me now is when I look back and look at how things have changed so much since, back then it was like a real focus on Facebook particularly, and Twitter. As we know, Twitter isn't Twitter anymore, but it's now X. We now have TikTok. There's now much more of a focus on Instagram. So the landscape changes really, and that's just in, a few years. So it really shows how much the landscape can change. So I think particularly with something like social media, it's really good to try and have a bit more of a presence across lots of different platforms, because you don't know which ones are going to end up being more popular. I think Facebook does seem in some senses a bit less popular, but things like Facebook groups are still used loads in more of a community sense. So it's also just about being adaptable and sort of knowing where to sort of focus your energies, but also knowing if those energies can change, if that makes sense.
And like you say, the social media landscape constantly changes. We're using a lot more like Instagram now. We've shifted away from Facebook at the Boar. So social media is constantly changing. But another thing that we all know with social media is the sharing of fake news is becoming a real problem, and AI, deepfakes, and all these things that are really starting to threaten the journalism landscape on social media. And as a journalist now, do you think that this sharing of fake news and the sharing of AI deepfakes and things like this can undermine the trust between the reader and the journalist? And do you think we need to do more to make sure this isn't becoming a problem in the news?
Yeah, of course. And I think it's just making sure that you really do source your information, where it's coming from. If you see a post from somebody online claiming something, then try and make sure you actually speak to the person rather than just like taking what they've said and assuming you know everything about it. So always trying to make sure that you go to the source to fact check information and check the information with official sources where you can. Breaking news is a very good example of that. If you see that there's a crime scene and someone's posting about it on the internet, then always go to the police to check that what people say is happening is actually happening, and get that from an official source. And I guess also for readers, when you're reading something or consuming something on social media, just have a look at the source and see like where it's come from. Just think about the background of it. If you see an individual posting on social media, is that person a trained journalist with, who's backed by a company, or are they a freelancer with a lot of experience? Things like that. Just try and like have a look at the information and think about where it's coming from, basically. And I think that's something that we all need to be more aware of, both as, I'm talking about this from not only a perspective of a journalist, but also as a reader of content on social media as well. I think that's all really, really important to make sure you know where it's coming from.
So after your time at My London, you went on to work at the Metro, first as assistant news editor, then as deputy news editor. Local journalism can often be worlds away from national newsrooms. So going from that local newsroom with those very hyper-local stories. How did going into a national newsroom differ? And did your time in local news set you up for your job at the Metro?
I mean, so basically I started my job at the Metro maybe a week into the first lockdown. So I started the job in, I think it was March or April 2020. I don't think that anything could have prepared me for starting a job in the middle of a pandemic, to be honest. So that was a little bit daunting, to say the least. You know, when I interviewed for the job, COVID was only sort of like whispering rather than it being a major thing. So I never could have foreseen what was going to happen. It meant that I started that job from home. And I didn't meet my colleagues for several months, which is really strange. So, it's something that I look back on in a way that I wasn't really expecting it to turn out the way that it was. And I thought that I was well prepared. But I think the reality was that no one was really prepared to report on something of such large proportions. I still remember very distinctly sat at my kitchen table watching the COVID briefings every day. And in a way that was quite a good exercise in preparing me for the nationals, because you'd just be watching the news briefings, and because a lot, until later on we didn't know what was going to be said, right? So a lot of the time it was all just breaking news happening really quickly, so we were just watching these press conferences and then picking out the best lines and doing breaking news stories on each of those things that had been announced and what they meant for people living around the country. And I think the most important thing that I learned was not only, when I was reporting for local media, you're sort of looking at an issue and you're thinking how it did impact local people. But for the nationals, you're looking at like one national issue and you're thinking, how will this affect lots of different people around the country? So it might affect people living in London in a different way to people living in Scotland, things like that. So you have to sort of start to think about things like kind of across multiple different communities rather than just one, which is really important and something that I still try and do today. And yeah, of course, a lot of everything that I was doing at that time was really concentrated on sort of health reporting and reporting on the pandemic. And there were just so many different stories that came out of it, not only sort of the reporting of like the figures and the science and the health behind it, but also just reporting on like everyday people's like realities of living through that. There were so many difficulties that people were going through at the time, different communities that were having different problems. So yeah, there was so much to do, and it's absolutely amazing to look back on how different things are now 5 years on, and such an impact that actually had on the country. It was a very unusual time to actually sort of be starting my career in the nationals. So I don't know if that was necessarily the answer that you wanted, but it's the answer that I have. So
No, I totally get that. And I can imagine, like you say, starting that job right at the start of COVID. We've spoke to some Boar editors who were starting their role at the Boar right at the start of COVID as well. And everything was really changing. But like you say, it's all about then centering the people in your story, and just looking from some of the preparing for the podcast, when we was looking at some of your articles, one of the things that really stood out to us was how you really center those people and lived experiences in your story, whether it be looking at the struggles of living below the poverty line or doing many features on the LGBTQ plus community. Would you say that human stories, I mean, you touched upon this earlier, but would you say that human interest stories are the bread and butter of journalism for you? And how would you recommend for Boar reporters now that they go about speaking to people and creating these features, and to really connect to our communities a bit more? Whereas obviously now we do a lot of news reporting and we'll report on the news that's happening, but maybe how can writers look at doing feature stories a bit more and really centering people at the heart of the story?
I think it probably rings true that no matter what kind of story you're doing, whether you're doing like a sort of in-depth interview with a person and making them the kind of focal point of your story, or whether you're writing a story that still impacts people, you've always got to think about the people are center of this. So even if you're reporting on something that feels, as you mentioned, very sort of news focused, even if you're reporting on some crime, or I don't know, maybe a new building's opened at the university, or there's lots of different more basic news stories that you could be writing, but the reason why you're writing them is because they always affect people in some way, right? That's why you're writing about it, because they affect people and people are interested in it. So if you're always thinking along those lines, you're always thinking, how does this affect people? What do people want to know about this? What is the thing that's really important for them to know? That will always get you far, I think, just by trying to center the people, even if it's not necessarily in an obvious way, if that makes sense. But I do also think that, as you mentioned, with the kind of like the features and centering people, like that is absolutely the thing to do, because you can only best tell a story of somebody's lived experience by listening to that person's story and telling it, like, you know, as accurate as truly as you can with the information that they have given you. And so much of that is actually more about the listening to the person and making sure that you sort of get that down best you can, whether that's via, you know, in a paper or online or via video or something like that. So I'd always say, like, as much as you can, always talk to people, and always ask more questions. Don't be afraid to get someone to explain something if you're not quite sure where they're coming from. And also don't be afraid to, you know, if they're telling you about something that, you know, they're particularly affected by, maybe it's something that, you know, is happening on campus, and don't be afraid to ask somebody if they feel comfortable sharing how they feel about that, or what they think should be done about that. And really making their opinion feel valued, because ultimately if you're interviewing somebody, then that shows that you do value their opinion. So never be afraid to go back and ask more questions. I feel like I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but
no, that's really, really good advice. So leading on from that, diversity and representation in the newsroom is something that you're very outspoken about. You were named by Attitude as one of their LGBTQ plus trailblazers last year. Do you think that since you started in journalism, we've seen improvements in representation, or are we still a long way off from where we need to be?
I think we have seen improvements, but there's always more work that can be done. And I think there's statistics that do reflect this as well, in that, you know, we do need to get lots of, you know, different types of people in our newsrooms. And, you know, I strongly believe that if you improve the diversity of the people behind the stories, then that means that you're going to be reaching out to more communities, because people who have contacts in different communities are then going to bring back the stories that aren't heard and the stories that aren't told. And we definitely need more diversity in our newsrooms in order to bring in those stories. I think it's probably the most broad way I can say it, really. And that is something that is still really important, and that's something that we absolutely do need to work on.
I think at the Boar, as editors, we all have a responsibility to really think about how we report on what's going on in campus, how we make sure we listen to everyone's stories, regardless of what background they come from. And I think to all editors and writers listening, we should really be thinking about what stories we're telling and how we can tell those stories a bit better. And I know as news editor that I help to make the decisions on what news we're reporting on. And I mean, as news editor now at The Independent, that is obviously you're now moved from being a writer to an editor, so you're making those decisions on what stories to report on as well. And when there's so much going on in the news at the moment, how do you just come to the decision over which topics are appropriate for the section, how we should, and which stories you should be reporting on?
Well, I guess you're kind of looking across lots of different sources, right? So you're sort of looking at the national news agenda, you know, what's top of the pile at the moment, what is everybody talking about. You're looking at the daily schedule to see you know, what's planned that day, from politics to what's in court, any, you know, big meetings that are happening between public figures and those kinds of things, any big announcements, or the release of any big reports. Then you're looking at like what the conversation is, you know, on social media, things like that. You know, you're listening to the radio, you're listening to the news, you're watching the news, you're looking at all these different sources. So there's quite a lot to keep track of. And obviously as well, you're then thinking about, you know, things that are happening home sides, things that are happening in the UK, things that are happening internationally as well. So there's quite a lot of different things to consider. And you're also listening to your reporters as well. Your reporters are coming to you and they're pitching different stories and they're saying, oh, well, I've heard people from this community saying this, or I've come across this really interesting statistic that I would like to dig into more. So you've got lots of different things that you're constantly trying to juggle, and you know, ideally you'll have a good balance and mixture across all of those things. And depending on what's happening on the day, you know, you might end up having a really big breaking news story that sort of knocks everything else out. So for example, when Trump visited the UK, that was like the big story of the day, and that's what everybody was interested in. So you're also kind of thinking about, if you've got any big exclusives, then you might want to save those for another day, because then you're not necessarily going to have all the interest in your exclusive if everyone's distracted by another big event that's happening. So you're just trying to constantly like think about what's happening nationally, you know, what's on the news agenda to try and make those decisions basically. But that's why you know, working together as a team and making sure that you have all those different things covered is really important, so you can get quite a wide breadth across all those different topics. Also thinking about what your particular audience cares about, so in the sense that at the Boar, obviously your audience is students and people on campus, right? So you're constantly thinking about, oh, we want to be writing things that our audience is interested in. So you're also thinking about shaping your content towards what people want to see. And increasingly now, particularly online, you get instant feedback on how many people are reading a story that you've written or a story that you published. So, you know, if I publish a story and immediately hundreds of people click on it, then I know that that's something of interest. And that also helps us shape our coverage in order to provide things that our readers do really want to hear about as well. So it's just about having a really broad balance across all of those things basically. But yeah, it's a big juggling act every day. And that's why we have a good team to be able to manage all of those things together.
And the Independent is quite different from a lot of other newspapers, and that doesn't actually have the physical print anymore, which we know as the Boar, we still, obviously, as we mentioned, we print less and we focus a lot more on the digital stuff side of journalism now as well. So how, as news editor, do you work around this digital only landscape? And do you think not having that physical print changes the way you work in any way?
It's amazing in the sense that it just completely changes the game, as you're just completely digital first. So it means that you can just focus on getting the news out to people as quickly as you possibly can, without having to sort of think about, you know, how it fits into a newspaper or something like that. And it means that the website and working online is always your sort of, you know, it's your number one priority. You just want to break that story and you want to get it out there. You'll probably see, if you're familiar with the Independent, that we do a lot of live blogs, you know, following everything from UK politics to the Ukraine war. It means that people can stay really up to date across all the main things. And if there's a big breaking news story happening as well, it's a really good way to get information to readers really quickly, because you're not having to think about fitting particular pieces of information into a word count, but you're having like small sort of blog posts where people can just really be like, okay, this is the latest thing that's happening. And that's a really great way to get information to readers as well. And that's something that I really enjoy, because covering the live blogs and doing things really quickly and live is really exciting. But we have a digital, it's essentially our app is a bit like a digital newspaper, so you can read things in a long form, and that means that we can get those stories together when we have more information, when we know things are accurate and correct, then we can put them into our app, and then they can be read in a more of a long form way as well. So what I really like is kind of the flexibility for people to be able to consume stories in the way that they want, because, you know, lots of people like to read live blogs and have things delivered to them sort of quickly and succinctly, but You also, sometimes people prefer to read something longer form where it has all of the information they need in one article. So I think it's really good to deliver all of those different things to your audience. And I think the way that that digital first model allows us to do that is really good and works very well. If I do say so.
And as well as working as news editor at The Independent, you keep yourself very busy. Aside from working in just newsrooms, one thing that's very clear from looking at your CV is that supporting young journalists to break into the industry is very important to you. You've held roles at the Student Publication Association, you're a mentor for the John Schofield Trust, and you've worked on publications targeted at young and upcoming journalists. Most of us at the Boar are obviously looking to get into the industry. So why is supporting new journalists something that's so important to you? Is there almost a bit of you that looks back at young Sian and goes, I want to help people in the way that I was helped at the start of my career?
I think so. And I think just like offering people that support so that they can learn is really, really important. And I think, again, sort of going back to the discussion that we were having about diversity in newsrooms, I think the more that you're open and talk to people and make them realise that this could be a career that works for them is what's going to bring fresh blood into our newsrooms from people from all sorts of different backgrounds and from different places and from different communities, which is really important. So I think that is one of the steps that does help us achieve that. And also traditionally journalism wasn't super accessible for everybody, and I think, as I said, there's more work to be done, but I think that is slowly improving. And the more that you talk to people and try and answer people's questions, if you're able to answer them and help them, then that's great. And, I'm a mentor in a couple of different capacities, and being able to sort of offer people that one-to-one advice is really helpful for them. And, that's part of the reason why I'm on this podcast, because hopefully some people will be listening to it and I'll have said something that helps them or inspires them in some way. So that's kind of my viewpoint on it, really. And I think those kinds of organisations that you mentioned, like the Student Publication Association, and even just like your community at the Boar and other people that you can speak to who are in the same position as you, and so you can figure things out together, is really important. So you can make those connections. There's people I met through the Boar and the SPA who I'm still friends with to this day. And some of them have gone on to have absolutely amazing careers at different publications and in journalism and on TV and things like that, which is just amazing. So you don't never really know where people are going to turn up, and then we still all lean on each other for support and advice and for friendship as well, even now. And I think that's something that's really lovely. And I think the more that you can spread that community feel, it's quite a small industry really, that I think that just really helps everybody and feel more comfortable discussing different issues and things that need to be addressed and corrected as well.
And one of the initiatives that you mentioned there was the SPAs. So we went to Exeter earlier this year with the Boar. We had a great time. Met so many inspiring journalists when we were there, went to so many different talks. And as you mentioned, the SPAs is something that you've been involved in for many years, beginning as Midlands Regional Officer, then going on to be Marketing Officer and later a trustee. So why do you believe that initiatives like the Student Publication Association are so integral for young journalists?
I think that is helpful in order to get different viewpoints from across. If you're sort of talking from a student paper perspective, obviously you have a way of working at the Boar and you have a particular way of doing things, which will be very different, I'd imagine, from when I was doing it many years ago. But then when you can meet different people from different student publications, you can see how they do things and you might learn things from other people, right? So you're like, I never thought about doing that in that way, but that's a really good idea. And it's just a really nice way to, aside from the networking I just mentioned, it's a really nice way to just learn about different ways of doing things, because that can help you improve your own paper or give you some different ideas. But also it goes the other way. Other people might learn from you too. And I think that makes, not just student papers, but the industry better as a whole, because you're just looking at things from a different perspective. And again, learning about different things that work for different communities. Different universities might want to consume their papers and then use in different ways to others, and I think that's a really interesting thing to explore as well. So yeah, I think that is just absolutely vital, and also just to come together, and I think that their annual awards are really good, and a way to celebrate some of the great work that student journalists are doing, particularly as I mentioned, lots of you have no training and then go out and get these amazing stories, and that sort of never fails to impress me, how dedicated some of you are to what you do. I think that's amazing, because we all have to, it's the difficult thing to juggle. It's my career now and it's my job now, so I get to focus on it. But when I was at university, obviously I was having to do my degree alongside and all of those other life things that you have to do. So doing it is essentially what's kind of a hobby alongside your degree, and then doing amazing things with it is really cool. And then again, it offers you the opportunity to turn it into a career, which is amazing. So I do just think, when I sort of found the SPA and realized that it was a thing, I just thought that was awesome, and it was something that I really wanted to get involved with, and it's amazing to see it's still thriving to this day.
Absolutely. As Lucy just said, we really enjoyed going down to Exeter, swapping our papers with other unis, and just gaining information and experience from not just industry experts, but also other people in the place that we are as well, and really talking to other editors at other newspapers, which was super helpful to us. So our conversation's coming to an end slowly now. We've had a great time chatting to you, but before we leave you, we're going to move on to a few quick fire questions, just to get to know you a bit more, get to know you as a person a bit more as well. So I'm going to start with one, and that is, are you a tea or a coffee person?
Coffee.
So
are you a real journalist if you're not into coffee?
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Morning person. I get most of my work done faster in the mornings, I think.
Who would you say is your dream interview guest?
Ooh. The thing is, I went on another podcast fairly recently, and I said Claudia Winkleman, and now I can't think of anybody else, but I have already given that. And if anyone has also listened to that podcast and listens to this one, they're just going to think you need to be more creative. So yeah, I suppose her, but then I suppose I would quite like to challenge a big political figure. Being able to interview someone like Donald Trump would be a absolutely, once in a many people's lifetimes opportunity. So being able to challenge someone like that would be something which would be an amazing opportunity.
What is one thing that you always carry with you as a journalist?
A pen. Is that, my phone? It's right here. Even though you need to write down a story. I feel like I should think of something more creative than that. But
what is your favourite thing to do to unwind after a long day at work?
I just like to ideally take a step away from my phone and just watch something on TV that's just a really easy watch, and something that just takes my mind off of work completely. Either that or cooking a really nice meal and just enjoying that is something that I like to do to unwind.
And finally, do you have an article which you are the most proud of?
I think something which I'm quite proud of recently, which is more of kind of a team thing that we did at the Independent, was our Brick by Brick campaign, where we raised money and awareness of victims of domestic abuse. We raised enough money to build 2 safe homes for survivors of domestic abuse. So that's something that we did as a team, which I'm still very proud of. And that's the kind of main thing that springs to my mind when you ask that question.
And that also brings us to the end of our quickfire questions, and nearly brings us to the end of our podcast. But we do have one more question to leave you on before we go. And that's the way we always end all our podcasts. And that is, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone at the Boar today?
I think just get stuck in and just enjoy it as much as you can. You only have a couple of years or 3 years just to have the experience of writing for your student paper, and it's something that I still look back on very, very fondly. So yeah, just get stuck in and get involved. Do as much or as little as you want to, but just make sure that you really enjoy what you do, get out of it, because that's something that will likely stay with you for a number of years, as it has done for me.
That's really good advice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sian. We've really enjoyed chatting with you, and we hope that all of our listeners have really gained, something from what you've been saying about your career in the same way that we have as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
We hope that you enjoyed listening to our interview with Sian. It was great to hear from a journalist who has had such an interesting career in the media already and worked at a variety of regional and national news publications.
Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll be speaking to a reporter at The Big Issue and talking all things November print.
In the meantime, you can stay up to date on everything Boar related at www.theboar.org and on Instagram at WarwickBoar, and check out the latest updates on the podcast at Hogging the Mic on Instagram.
In 2 weeks' time, on the 6th of November, we'll be back with our next episode. But for now, good luck securing a seat in the Fab, fighting your way onto the U1 and surviving all of the Halloween celebrations.